Sarah Layden. Not at DePaul, at IUPUI, right? That's
Yes.
in her first novel. Now, the date has the date changed, or is it still March 17th?
March 17th.
Oh, it's your first novel, yeah?
That's right.
And it's called
Trip Through Your Wires.
All Caps. All Caps. It's in all caps everywhere I see it. So that's coming out March 17th. She will be reading a little bit from that tonight when you all go over to the fundraiser over at Indy Fringe. So if you want to hear the reading and not just the performance of it, do that.
Okay, it's my turn. Awesome. Well, thank you. Middle name Pause. Sarah Pause. Thank you so much for coming out, and the people who have already read, you guys were awesome. It's really exciting and fun to get to do this with you too. And Brad has his rules that he established, the stomping and the clapping and I'm going to add some more. Okay, I like some audience participation as well. So I would like, if you're willing, this side of the room, say to the podium, if you could do this for me, it's just 3 snaps like this. You are so good. Stop. Okay. And when I point to you, that's when I'm going to need you to snap. That was excellent. You're very good at snapping. Now from here over to, say, this podium, I'll include you. Okay. You guys are going to be 4 quick claps. That was pretty good. Let's do it one more time. 4 quick claps when I point to you. So much better. Crisp. I like it. Okay, good. And so from the podium over to here, you guys are going to be my Bruce Springsteen section. He has a song called Fire. I don't know if you know it. But all you need to do is say, Fire, when I point to you. Let's practice. 1, 2, 3. Fire. Very good. That was it. Keep going, keep going. Fire. Okay, so I'm gonna, you know, a novel in 10 minutes. I'm not quite sure how we do that because I think I only have 8 minutes left. But what I have to do is to tell you what I'm not going to tell you about, in addition to what I am going to tell you about. Because with a novel, it's a pretty big thing. So if I tell you that I'm telling the story of Carrie and Ben, who are 2 American college students studying in Mexico, you might get a preconceived notion about what that story is about. You might think to yourself, oh, they're a couple? Well, maybe that's kind of romantic. Maybe that's kind of just like a Romeo and Juliet. But that's not it. That's not what this story is. It's not that at all. And if I told you about the things that go wrong in Mexico, that maybe not everything was as Carrie thought, that maybe there was unseen problems or danger, that not everything was on the up and up. You might get the idea of that old Steve Miller song, you know, the 2 young lovers with nothing better to do. So if I said, this is the story about Billy Joe and Bobby Sue, very good. But it's not that either. It's not that story either. So where do we go from here? What story am I going to tell you? Well, I could tell you about Carrie in Indianapolis knowing Ben, but Ben not knowing Carrie. She saw him tossing dough at a pizza shop at a mall. She followed him home one time in her car. He didn't see her. She saw him. She knew where he lived. We could call it stalking, but did Carrie think of it that way? I don't think she did. Carrie just had this interest. She was pulled to him. She knew he went to the University of Wisconsin because he wore a sweatshirt at the pizza shop one day. She knew that he was in an exchange program in Mexico because she saw his face on a picture, on a brochure. And so she applied to go to Mexico. She applied to this program. And she wound up going. And they wound up meeting. Actually meeting, not stalker meeting, light stalking, not that kind of meeting, but actually knowing each other. And finally, what she has dreamed of, what she's wanted, they become a couple. And Ben has a best friend who's also in the program, Mike. They're both from University of Wisconsin. We're not going to talk too much about all of that, but I could tell you the story about the fact that at some point Ben stands Carrie up on a date, and that Carrie winds up going home with Mike, Ben's best friend. and that Carrie is in Mike's dorm room when they get a knock on the door that Ben is missing. That's not the story I'm going to tell you either. I'm not going to tell you the story of how Ben died in Mexico. I'm not going to tell you the story about how Carrie failed to cope, didn't know how to grieve, got sent home because she couldn't even brush her hair or her teeth or get out of bed. I'm not going to tell you the story about 7 years later, when there's finally a break in the murder case, when there's finally news about what happened, and Carrie is back in Indianapolis, arrested in her development, and unable to understand what the past meant. No, I'm not going to tell you that story. The story I'm going to tell you is a little bit different. It's just like, if I could compare it to something, it would be just like
fire.
So it's the first day of classes. We have to rewind. First day of classes in Mexico. Guanajuato, Mexico. It's in the mountains, in the central mountainous region of Mexico. And Carrie is standing outside before class. She has a notebook. She has a brand new package of pens she hasn't even opened. And Ben and Mike appear as she's standing outside one of the lecture halls. And, you know, she's trying to converse with them and hang out. And they say, so are you ready? Are you ready for the first day? And she says, yeah, absolutely. And they said, okay, great, let's go. And she thinks of her pens and her bag. She's like, no, I have class in 5 minutes. And they say, you don't. We're teaching class today. And so off she goes, skipping the very first day. Off she goes into Guanajuato. They are walking over cobblestone streets. They pass the basilica, they pass the cathedral, they go through El Parque and El Centro. They see all the merchants, all the vendors, the small children selling chicle. And they lead her through all of these winding streets. They pass the Banco Federal, where the guards are standing there, cradling machine guns in their arms, like babies they wanted to toughen up. They didn't have those back home in Indianapolis. Eventually they lead her through an alley. And Ben knocks on a door and then pushes it open anyway. It's dark in this alley, but as the door opens, sunlight, it's beautiful. It's a garden. It's this gorgeous courtyard, apartments several stories high with balconies surrounding all the beautiful plants and flowers and little trees. And there's a man there, youngish man, a little bit older than them maybe, Carrie and Ben and Mike. And the three of them walk in. He greets the men, introduces himself to Carrie, and he has 3 chairs that he's setting up for them, as if they are an audience for a show. He goes back and leans against the wall. No chair for him. The 3 Americans sit down beneath this balcony. There's nobody there. They're not sure what's happening. And finally a door opens up above on the 2nd floor. And an older man steps out. He's got long gray hair. He looks a little bit like royalty, maybe royalty in need of a bath. He's maybe got an air of deposed dictator to him. He steps out carrying a flask. And in the corner of the balcony, he picks up half a broomstick. It's got a thin layer of cloth wrapped around it, taped around one end. He sticks it under his arm and holds the flask, and he slowly makes eye contact with the 3 Americans in the chairs down below, his subjects. And he drinks from the flask. He takes out a lighter, lights it, and then blows a fireball out over their heads. And Carrie jumps back, even as she's seated, shrieks, and watches as he blows this fire out over them for as long as the air will go out of his lungs. And at the very last moment, he takes his little makeshift broomstick torch out from under his arm, holds it out, and sets it on fire. And he motions to Carrie with the fire, and he says, "Res Kelly, vete aquí." Well, she's wearing a scarf over her hair, but she doesn't know how else she might resemble Grace Kelly, 50s, Monaco royalty, or married into royalty. But she goes anyway. Ben and Mike push her forward. And she stands beneath this man who's holding a torch and talking to her. He says, I've known these boys. These are good American boys, I think. He's talking to her in Spanish. She's scrambling to translate all of the emotions, all the sensations. And then he says, we'll see about you, huh? Catch. And he tosses the torch down to her. Her first instinct is to withdraw, bring her arms back, but she reaches out because she knows this is a test. She knows, even if she doesn't know what the answer to this test is, that she must reach out her hands in this moment, or get burned, or lose, or win. She doesn't even know. So she reaches out and she grabs for the torch. It bobbles in her hand. The scarf keeps her hair back, thank God. She eventually grasps it. She's shaking, she's trembling, she's like an Olympian. She holds it in the air and everyone screams and yells. You know, woo! They're so excited for her that she caught this thing. And moments later, the man up on the balcony that Ben and Mike both know, Alejandro, they called him El Viejo, they call him fondly as if he were an uncle. He's standing before her and he asks for the torch back. She gives it back to him gladly, still shaking. And he turns sideways as they're seated in the chairs so they can have the better view. And he sticks his belly out and he tilts his head back and he lifts up the torch and extinguishes it in his mouth with a slow flourish and sizzle. And as they're standing there with the smoke all around their heads, cheering, applauding, Alejandro approaches Ben, Carrie's boyfriend, her object of affection for much longer than he could have known, approaches him and says, I thought you were going to take my picture today. Where's your camera? And Ben says, with his eyes angry, loaned it. Alejandro tells him, you know better, hijo. And Ben nods. They shake hands, which you think might have been a peace offering. Carrie sees something as they're shaking hands. She thinks she sees something. It's a flash. It's light, it's color. It could be money. It could be a small packet containing a small substance. But she doesn't know. And in her mind, she tells herself, like so many other things that happened in Mexico, maybe it was all in her head. Thanks.
My wife is going to pass out the response forms. I have pens. Nobody has pens anymore, like phone calls. Nobody makes phone calls. Nobody has cash.
Share with your new friends. 8.7.
Oh my God, on the last one.
Well, I only got that one in the gap, so I'm sure you get it.
I'm good journalist doing math.
Don't you have a calculator on your phone?
I do, but I don't have my phone with me. It's rude to have my phone in front of people. That's what my dad told me. Well, I'd like to, first of all, before we announce the winner and while these are being passed out, thank you all. This is clearly the biggest jam that we've had so far. So thank you guys for coming out tonight. And thank our authors for coming out. This is a harrowing experience. If they are only now beginning to enjoy, now that it's over. Down to Indie Fringe tonight, $15, 2 drink tickets with that. We'll have some readings from Barb and Sarah and Sal. I don't know if Sal's gone. Maybe back there already. Don't forget on your way out, vouch books. Are you going to have vouch books down at the Fringe as well?
I can.
It's up to you. But
Get them now.
But get them now, so stop on the way out and make sure you check out the books that are there. Our winner tonight, who will receive nothing. Bragging rights from the jam, right? Because we had fractions tonight.